On another matter, the preservation of the Great Barrier Reef, why did you and Prime Minister Turnbull allocate more than $400 million to a Queensland foundation without any sort of tender process?
Well, we chose the most appropriate organisation to partner with to leverage off the private sector's philanthropic efforts. Now, this organisation, the foundation, has been around for nearly 2 decades. The Labor Party contributed to it when they were in office. They have raised around $80 million themselves, and they have some of Australia's most reputable and leading, not only philanthropic leaders, but
But Minister, it could be the most credible organisation in the world, but there was no tender, no oversight, no transparency, no records that we are aware of, which means we have to take your word on that. How does that meet appropriate standards of governance?
Well, a couple of things. Firstly, we have complied with the government's guidelines on grants. We have reached an extensive partnership agreement with the foundation, which is public. The Australian Audit Office will be able to follow the money, and there will continue to be close cooperation between the foundation, the federal government and the Queensland government.
Is this standard practice, though, where the government would give $400 million to an organisation without any sort of tender process or transparency around that?
Well, the first thing to say is this is the largest single investment by a government in reef preservation and conservation. And the only reason the Labor Party is raising this, Lee, is because they abandoned the reef when they were in office. They had 5 dredge disposal projects.
Sorry to interrupt, Minister. You're not addressing my point. You're not addressing my point there, which is about the actual process. $400 million of taxpayer money going to a body without any sort of tender or transparency around that.
Well, there is a lot of transparency. There is a public agreement. As I said, the Audit Office will continue to be able to follow the money. You've got compliance with the government's guidelines. It's an organisation which the Labor Party contributed to, and it has some of Australia's leading scientists and those who are involved in philanthropic organisations. So it's a very reputable partner for the Commonwealth, but unlike any other previous grant, we're seeking to build and to leverage off our contribution, $500 million strong, from the private sector, because the reef deserves that level of support. Now, the Labor Party abandoned the reef. They had it on the endangered watch list. We've been praised for our management of the reef. This is an important contribution and should be recognised as such.
Well, you are an experienced minister. It didn't give you any pause that you were making a $400 million grant to an organisation which at the time had just 6 full-time staff without any due process? That didn't strike you as unusual, that it was just you and the Prime Minister sitting there and you handed over $400 million?
Look, my department, including my secretary, have had more than 20 meetings.
That is an interesting response. To quote Mr. Frydenberg, my department, including my secretary, have had more than 20 meetings with the foundation. Goodness gracious, that's $20 million per meeting, not a bad return. It took me more than 20 meetings to buy a car, let alone secure $400 million. Maybe Mr. Frydenberg has lost touch with reality. Why will he not answer the very clear question that Lee Sales asked repeatedly?
Since early April with the foundation, and like I said, the Commonwealth, the State Government of Queensland will be consulted on investment decisions. There's a very public partnership agreement. The Audit Office can be involved in following the money, and we have some of Australia's leading scientists who are expert around the reef who are involved already with this foundation. So I really think that this is being raised as a distraction from the government's achievement in investing in the reef as opposed to anything else.
So if Labor were in power and they gave $400 million to an organisation without a tender, the coalition will just go, yep, no worries.
Josh Frydenberg claims the $444 million handout to GBRF complies with guidelines. When questioned by Lee Sales of the ABC 7:30 program, Mr. Frydenberg would not answer the question directly and seemed, as politicians often do, to wish to avoid a straight answer. The central question was not if the allocation of more than $440 million was appropriate, but if the process of how the money was allocated was appropriate. Mr. Frydenberg seemed to not want to answer this very clear and important question. Was this because of the fact that one of the board members of the Great Barrier Reef Preservation Fund is an ex-Goldman Sachs partner? As we know, Mr. Turnbull was a senior partner and managing director of Goldman Sachs Australia. It could be a question that Mr. Frydenberg does not want to answer. For example, is it appropriate to hand over what amounts to just shy of $500 million, without tender, to an organisation that has links to the investment banking firm that Mr. Turnbull was once managing director of? Mr. Turnbull doesn't have a clean record when it comes to deals. In May 2002, Turnbull appeared before the HIH Insurance Royal Commission to be questioned on Goldman Sachs' involvement in the possible privatisation of one of the acquisitions of the collapsed insurance company. The Royal Commissioner's report made no adverse findings against him or Goldman Sachs. However, Turnbull was one of 9 defendants who settled later litigation over the collapse in undisclosed payments, thought to be worth as much as $500 million.
We want you to keep more of the money you've earned. It's not the government's, it's yours.
Bunnings for a hammer drill and polyfill. Michaelia Cash.
We want you to realise your dreams. We want you to keep more of the money you've earned. It's not the government's, it's you.
You've seen in and around Canberra what they've been.